Welcome to the Connecting the World by Stories. And it's been the World Storytelling Cafe. It has been an amazing week. I've missed some of it on account of the fact that I tried to, that there was a bollard. Well, it wasn't a bollard, it was a troll. It was a troll that disguised itself as a bollard and ran in front of my bicycle, knocked me off my bicycle, and I smashed up. I know it was a troll because we've had a lot of Scandinavian tellers on lately, and they've talked about trolls, and I know what they do. I know what they get up to. We have been educated by the stories. We've got a fantastic week coming up. We've got Dave Tong tomorrow night with a book launch, a live book launch, because he can't go anywhere to do a physical book launch. So he's launching his new book with us. I'm hoping he'll come on later and tell me about it. We've got but tonight we're exploring the theme of rejected and abandoned daughters, which through there's two stories. Well, it started as one story and it splits up throughout history for the bit more academic people amongst you. The Cinderella starts in ancient Egypt, and about the earliest Cinderella story we know about is from ancient Egypt from about 28 BC. Then there's a Chinese one which is even better known, about 600 AD, and then from there it sort of splits up into either stories about property, which is the Cinderella stories, where they're kicked out, where daughters are kicked out because someone else moves in who want their daughters to have everything, or it's fathers that, because fathers are really insecure and they want people to tell them how wonderful they are all the time, and that splits up into the I love you more than salt stories, and sometimes they get mixed up. So, for instance, the story that I've been telling for 1,000 years, which was collected, Mossy Coat, which was collected from an English gypsy in about 1915. That seems to be a mixture of those two things. But right now, I'm going to start off. Because these are stories, the same stories appear all over the world. So we have David. Are you ready, David? Nod if you're ready. Oh, fantastic. Right. So David is sitting in Austin in Texas with hello, Veronica. Right. Sitting in Austin in Texas with an Iroquois version of Cinderella, as far as I remember. Is this true, David?
Oh, it is true. It is true, but it's also known as part of the Micmac Nation.
Okay, so give us a little background about this story, if you could, before you tell it.
Well, the story has been traced to many different groups or nations, but I don't like to say the word tribes, nations around the Great Lakes area, Lake Superior, Lake Huron, and all that. And it deals with the youngest daughter being rewarded for her ability to see things that the others cannot. That's the best I can give to you without telling you the story right away.
Well, tell us the story then.
Okay, well, here we go.
Go for it.
All right, friends, this is Little Burnt Face. It's the one I'm going to tell you, the version, if you will. I'm going to tell you comes from the Micmac Nation, which is part of the Iroquois Confederacy. You have to look this all up historically. So anyway, once when the children of nature lived in the woodlands and they were close to the land, there lived in a small village a hunter, a widower he was, and his 3 daughters. The oldest was ugly and vain and cruel, and the second one was just beyond herself with great pride. But the youngest was lovely and gentle and humble. Well, when the father was away, the oldest 2 would beat the youngest one, and they would burn her face with coals and scar her body and singe her hair off. And when the father came home and asked, why is she looking like this? The elders would say, oh, she's just clumsy. She plays with the coals. She falls all over the place. She just has all sorts of problems. and the father would scold her and would add to her misery. Now, in this same village, in the choicest spot, was the largest wigwam. And in that wigwam was the chief of the village who lived with his sister. The only thing, though, is no one ever saw the chief, for he was invisible. The only thing that the people in the village would see were his moccasins when his sister would hang them up outside to dry. It was said one spring that the sister made it known that her brother, the great chief, the invisible one, remember that, decided he wanted to get married. So all the young ladies from all the neighboring villages made themselves beautiful, put on their best beads and their best blankets and plaited their hair and put on their beaded moccasins, and they all came to the village. The chief's sister would meet them and greet them and would say, "Oh, have you seen him?" Oh, yes, we have. Yes, we have. Well, what is his shoulder strap made of? Rawhide. Oh, the best rawhide. Very well done. And with what does he drive his sled? Why, a green withy, as anyone does. Well, the sister knew that none of these young ladies had seen her brother, but she took them into the great wigwam and they prepared food, and the girls would sit there and watch and see the food disappear, but they could see nothing eating it. And no matter how much they squinted, they could not see anything. And soon it was the turn of the three sisters, of which the youngest was little Burnt Face. Well, the oldest two got their finest blankets and their best beads, and they plaited their hair in the most beautiful patterns, and they put on their best embroidered moccasins, and they set off. Well, little Burnt Face did what she could because the sisters did nothing to help her. And she put on her birch bark clothes, and she did what she could with her singed hair, and she put on her father's moccasins because she thought it would be best to not appear there barefoot. Well, she caught up with her sisters, and her sisters, they didn't say anything because they did not know whether or not the chief was around, since remember, he was invisible. And then a great darkness came, and the wind came, and the clouds came, and they knew that the chief was there. The chief's sister came out and greeted the three young ladies and asked the oldest one, "Do you see him?" Oh, yes, I do. Yes, I do. What is his shoulder strap made of? Oh, the finest rawhide. Well, the chief's sister knew that she did not see him. But she asked the second question, "With what does he drive his sled?" "Why, a green withy, as any man does." And the sister of the chief, knew that that was not true. Well, she asked the second sister, and the same answers. And she came to little Burnt Face and said, "Do you see him?" And she said, "Oh, I do. And he is so beautiful." And the sister said, "With what is his shoulder strap made?" It is the rainbow." "And with what does he draw? What is his bow made of?" "His bow is made of the Milky Way." And the sister knew. She knew then that little Burnt Face had seen her brother. So she took little Burnt Face into the wigwam, and she stripped her down, and she bathed her with the morning dew, and she dressed her hair with the finest bear fat, and her skin became lovely and young and beautiful. The scars and the burns were gone, and her hair grew and became long and lustrous. The sister took to her best dresses, and she dressed little Burnt Face. And the chief entered, and he was so full of awe and beauty, and he knew that this was to be his wife. So he took her as his mate, and everyone was happy. The wedding feast lasted for a week or so. Oh, as for the two older sisters, they went back to their wigwam in shame and were considered outcasts by the rest of the village. And that is the story.
Oh, thank you, David. Oh, and where's Julio? Is I was down there somewhere. We've got another Cinderella story. We're going south this time, and we're going to India for the next Cinderella story. But because Deeptha it's the middle of the night in India, so she's had to pre-record and send her story over. Because I said I'd bring her up and wake her up at 3 o'clock in the morning or whatever it is there, but you know, she said no thanks, John, I'll pre-record. So this is Cinderella has gone from the lakes down to the Punjab, and are we ready with Deeptha's story?
Nearly there.
Nearly there. I should have told you before that this was going to be I just think you're a magician, and I just have to flick my fingers and it'll happen. So,
I am, but I forgot the magic words for this one.
Okay. So I see all sorts of people on here. Have I gone out of myself? Or right. Well, we got. I mean, the Cinderella stories I've got in my head are there's the Yugoslavian one where mother becomes a cow, and she's cut up, and because she helps with the tasks that Cinderella is given. The Cinderella, when she's asked to spin, the spindle is put in the cow's mouth, and we've got it. We'll tell you more about that later. But right now, we have from the Punjab a folk tale retold by Deeptha.
I love this story. I first read it in A.K. Ramanujan's Folk Tales from India, and I've told it several times. It's one of my favorites. Bopaluchi may be an orphan, but she has so much spunk that she won't hesitate to kill if she needs to protect herself. I'm a sucker for stories of strong and feisty women like Bopaluchi, and the women in the folklore of Punjab are a breed apart. They are brave, they are romantic and outspoken, and they're witty and fierce, and they're always ready to break into a song and a jig. I hope you enjoyed this one. Bopaluchi. Once upon a time, in a pind or a village in Punjab, a group of young girls had gathered at the well to draw water. As they drew their pails up, they began talking about their soon-to-be arranged weddings. Arey sun, my fiancé is very rich. He is going to bring me the finest jewels as a wedding present, said one. Amy, my fiancé is richer than you can imagine. He is going to gift me a koti, a huge house as a wedding present, said another. Oof, bus, my fiancé is richer than both yours put together and a few more. He has promised to get me a beautiful silk dupatta. Bopaluchi was quietly listening to all this. You see, Bopaluchi was an orphan. She had been abandoned when she was just a little girl and grew up as a child of the village. Although she had her own little house, everyone in the village took very good care of her, and these girls were her best friends. But Bopaluchi didn't want to be left behind in the bragging contest, so she began to sing. Pindidiya, oh pindidiya, ah pindidiya lambardara ho, padai mein laal kagra. Oh, Kurion, girls, my fiancé is the lumberdar of the next village. He is so rich that he is going to give me jewels, he is going to bring me sweets, he is going to gift me a koti, he is going to bring me a beautiful brocade dupatta and a lovely rich red bridal skirt that I have asked him for. Better than any of you can ever dream of, huh? She said. Acha! Good luck dreaming, Bopulucci, mocked one of the girls. And they all started laughing. Bopulucci felt a tinge of sadness in her heart. She wished she had a family that could arrange her wedding as well. But she laughed along too, being the sport that she was. The mustard fields were in full bloom, and their yellow flowers were swaying in all their glory as the girls teased each other. And not far from where the girls were was a tree behind which a robber was hiding. He heard Bopulucci sing and was immediately struck by her voice, her beauty, and her spirit. He wanted to marry her right away. And so he stealthily followed Bopulucci to see where she lived. And the next day, he came disguised as a rich man riding his horse, carrying jewels, sweets, a lovely fulkari dupatta, and an exquisitely embroidered red silk skirt. All things he had looted from other people's houses. Bopulucci was sitting on her manji, the cot, and fanning herself with her pankha, when she heard a knock on the door. Bopulucci, open the door. I'm your long-lost uncle. Look what I've brought you. Now, Bopulucci opened the door rather suspiciously, but she could hardly believe her eyes, for everything was just as she had foretold just the previous day. And the robber said he was her father's brother who had been away for many, many years and had now come back to arrange her wedding with one of his sons, her cousin. Hearing this, Bopulucci believed it all, and so pleased was she that she quickly packed up all the things that she had, the few things that she possessed, in a bundle and set off with the robber in high spirits. But as they went along the road, a crow sitting on a branch croaked.
Bopulucci, beware! There is danger in the air. It's no uncle that relieves you, but a robber who deceives you.
Uncle, said Bopulucci, that crow croaks funnily. What is it trying to say? All the crows in this country are like that. Ignore them, he said. A little farther on, they rode into the forest, and there she heard a peacock, which, as soon as it caught sight of pretty Bopulucci, it began to scream. Bopulucci, beware! There is danger in the air. It's no uncle that relieves you, but a robber who deceives you. Uncle, said Bopulucci, that peacock screams rather funnily. What is it trying to say? Returned the robber. All peacocks scream like that in this country. Ignore them. And a little while later, a jackal slunk across the path the moment it saw poor pretty Bopulucci, and it began to howl. Bopulucci, beware! There is danger in the air. It's no uncle that relieves you, but a robber who deceives you. Uncle, said Bopulucci, that jackal howls funnily. What is it trying to say? Said the robber, all jackals howl like that in this country. Ignore them. And so Bopulucci journeyed on till they reached the robber's house. There he told her who he really was and how he intended to marry her himself. Bopulucci wept and cried bitterly, but the robber had no pity and left her in charge of his old, oh, ever so old mother, while he went out to make arrangements for the wedding feast. Now, Bopulucci had such beautiful long black hair that it reached right down to her ankles. But the old hag hadn't a hair on her bald head. When she saw Bopulucci, she remarked,
What a beautiful girl my son has chosen. He surely has good taste. Beta,
said the old hag, as she was putting on the bridal dress on Bopulucci.
how did you manage to get such beautiful hair?
Bopulucci was not amused, but she was quick to think. Well, my mother would make me lay down with my head on the mortar, and with a pestle she would pound my head every day and make my hair grow long. At every stroke of the pestle, my hair grew longer and longer. I assure you, it's a plan that never fails.
Perhaps it would make my hair grow too,
said the old woman eagerly. Perhaps it would, said clever Bopulucci. And so the old, ever so old mother put her head on the mortar, and Bopulucci pounded away with such force that the old lady fell unconscious. Then Bopulucci dressed the old lady in the red silken bridal dress, propped her up on the bridal chair, drew the veil over her face, and put the spinning wheel in front of it so that when the robber came home, he might think that it was Bopulucci. And then she put on the old mother's clothes, and seizing her own bundle, she stepped out of the house and ran as quickly as possible. On her way, she caught sight of the robber, who was returning with a stolen millstone that he was carrying on his head to grind the corn for the wedding feast. Now she was dreadfully frightened, and she slipped behind the hedge so as to not to be seen. But the robber, not recognizing her in the old lady's clothes, thought that she was some other strange woman from a neighboring village maybe. And so, to avoid being seen himself, he slipped behind another bush. Now Bopulucci waited for the coast to be clear, and she ran as fast as she could. She called out to the jackal, the peacock, and the crow to help her trace her way back. And they sang their strange song once again. Bopulucci, run, girl, run, before down goes the sun. Follow the sound of this song bravely, and you'll be home safely. And so Bopulucci followed the sound and reached her village before sundown. Meanwhile, the robber, having come to his house, called out to Bopulucci to give him a hand to help him carry the millstone inside. But she didn't answer. Bopulucci, he called again. But she still didn't answer. He saw the figure in bridal red sitting on the bridal chair, spinning, and of course he thought that it was Bopulucci. How impertinent! And then he fell into a rage and he flung the millstone at her head. The figure toppled over. And lo and behold, it was not Bopulucci at all, but his old, ever so old mother. The robber fell to his knees, he wept, he beat his breast, thinking he had killed his own mother. But when he discovered that Bopulucci was missing, he became so wild with rage, he determined to bring her back somehow. Now, Bopulucci was back in her village, and she knew that the robber would try to carry her off. So every night, she begged to sleep in a friend's house, leaving her own little bed in her own little house quite empty. But after a month or so, she had come to the end of her friends and her neighbors, and she didn't want to ask them another time. So she decided to brave it out and sleep in her own little house, on her own little bed. Whatever happened. But this time, she took a bill hook to bed with her. Sure enough, in the middle of the night, 4 men crept in, and each seizing a leg of the manji or the bed, lifted it up and walked off. The robber himself was holding the leg close behind her head. Now Bopulucci was wide awake, but she pretended to be fast asleep until they came to a wild, deserted spot where the thieves were now off their guard. And right at that moment, Bopulucci whipped out the bill hook and in her flash cut off the heads of the 2 thieves at the foot of the bed. And turning around quickly, she did the same to one of the thieves who was still standing there. But the main robber, the uncle robber, had run away in a terrible fright, and he had scrambled up a tree like a wild cat. Bopulucci took out her bill hook, looked up at him and said, come down and fight me like a man." But the robber would not move an inch. So Bopulucci gathered all the sticks that she could find, piled them up around the tree, and set fire to them. Of course, the tree caught fire also, and the robber, half stifled with the smoke, tried to jump down, but he was caught in the fire and was burnt to death. After that, Bopulucci went to the robber's house, and she carried off all the gold and the silver and the jewels and the clothes that were hidden there. She came back to her village so rich that she could marry anyone she pleased and when she pleased. And that's the end of Bopulucci's story.
Truly, truly amazing. Well, after that, I think we take a deep breath. And there's so one of the branches, as I mentioned at the beginning of the program, which we've all forgotten about because that wonderful story. In fact, I've forgotten about the theme of the program altogether. No, it's I Love You More Than Salt. And I used to do storytelling up on the Norfolk Broads in Norfolk in England, and once a week in a little country museum. And it was mainly tourists, but there was one family used to come every week, and it was everything from the babe in arms to the great grandmother, and they loved I Love You More Than Fresh Meat Loves Salt stories. So every week I had to look, never mind fresh meat, I had to look for a fresh story from somewhere in the world. And I found stories from Scotland, from East Anglia, but we'll hear about that from Tom later. And well, mixed up with a bit of Shakespeare. Thank you, Tom. And I gave a couple of Czech lads. It was just after all the changes in Eastern Europe, so I gave a couple of Czech lads up to a lift up, and they told me a Czech version. Right now, I better give you a warning. What I'm going to do after this is I'm going to drop in the second, that 3-minute video for we're doing this story, we're doing Nana's, and then we're going away from the theme, but it's not so much girls that have been rejected, but girls who just take control of everything if anyone has the audacity to come into their space. Thank you, Sarah. And so we're going to have after this with Veronica up in Transylvania, where I have a house. We're going to have they've done a little film, which we're going to have. But right now, if she's unmuted and she's got a big smile on her face and she's absolutely ready to go, we'll have a Bulgarian story from Nana. Are you ready?
So this is a Bulgarian version of Salt is the Dearest, or I Love You More Than Salt. I'm not sure what century the story is from, but I found it in one of my Bulgarian storybooks, and this is my translation version. So I hope you enjoy it. There was once a king, and this king had 3 daughters. Every one of them was fairer than the last one. And he loved his daughters dearly. And unlike many kings, he played a big part in their upbringing. He was there every day, telling them stories, teaching them things. And like every father, he wanted them to grow to be successful and clever, and like those times, marry well. And so one day he was sitting with them, and he was stroking and caressing their hair lovingly and reading to them. And then he suggested they play a game. So a child loves to play games, and they played all sorts of games, and they laughed, and finally they tired themselves out. And so he said to them, "Daughters, I'd like to ask you a question." And he said to the oldest daughter, "Oldest daughter, tell me how much you love me." "My father, I love you like I love gold and silver." "Ah, if you love me so much, we'll marry you. We'll marry you to the richest knyaz, which is a count. And there you'll be able to wear gold and wear silk every day. And you, my middle daughter, how much do you love me?" "Oh, father, I love you like honey, and I love you like precious jewels." "Ah, if it is this much that you love me," said the Tsar, "we'll marry you into a rich tsarstvo, a kingdom, and there you'll be able to eat as much as you want and wear the most majestic things that you could find. And you, my youngest daughter, how much do you love me?" "Father, I love you as much as I love salt." "As much as salt? As much as salt?" said the Tsar. "Well, you don't love me at all. Well, get out of here. Get out of my sight. Get out of my kingdom. A shame all this effort we've put into raising you so far. From this day forward, you are no longer my daughter. I don't want to see you. I don't want to hear you. Get out from my sight." At this point, the Tsaritsa, the queen, she heard what was going on. She was frightened, and she went to ask what was happening. And when she understood, she tried to fix things. She tried to untangle the mess that has happened like any mother would. But the Tsar had none of it. His word was said, and that was final. And so the girl had to leave her house. Years passed. The Tsar married off his oldest daughters like he wanted to. And he was in relation with the most successful of different Tsars. And for the youngest daughter, well, she was alive and well. She'd been walking a long time. Her feet blistered, her clothes filled with dust. And one day, as she was walking, she saw an old man. He was with a long beard, and he was crippled, and he carrying a heavy load with his clothes tattered and torn. He was leading a donkey, and he hardly walked. And this girl was good-natured, so she ran towards him and said, "Diado, grandfather, can I help you?" And the old man looked at her and smiled and asked where she came from. Who was her father? Who was her mother? And she told him she had no father. She had no mother. She was all alone in this world. Well, the old man was delighted. He invited her to spend her days in the little cottage in the little village that he lived in. He'd loved some company. And so the girl went to live in the old man's cottage, which was just at the edge of the forest. And this forest was between this kingdom and another kingdom, another tsarstvo. And in this forest, it was both kingdoms that hunted. And from the other kingdom, the person that hunted the most was the Tsar's son, the prince. One day, he went hunting like every other day. And then after he had finished, he went to sit by and speak with the old man in the cottage. He was a quiet man, a nice man, and liked to hear the gossip from the forest. And so he went to speak with the old man. Today he went. Tomorrow he went. He saw the girl. He liked the girl. He fell in love with the girl and wanted to marry her. And so he went home and told his father, the Tsar from the next kingdom. The Tsar was furious. You will not marry a cripple's daughter, a beggar's daughter. It will be shame on me. No, you will not. And the Tsar had spoken. But the Tsar's son, he threatened he'd become a monk if he wasn't allowed to marry this girl. And the Tsar was angry. He thought, and finally he decided he had a plan. He was going to go and drive that girl out. And so one day he mounted his horse and galloped into the woods to go hunting. And at midday, he went into the old man's hut. And there at the door, he saw a young woman. She was beautiful, and she was fair and clean and well made, but her clothes were tattered and full of rags. At that moment, the Tsar realized that this was the girl that his son loved. He asked her, "Where is your father?" "My grandfather isn't here," she said. "He went to gather wood. He'll be back later. You're welcome to sit and wait for him." "And where's your father?" asked the Tsar. "Well, I don't have a father. Not since he chased me out of the kingdom." "What kingdom?" asked the Tsar, very surprised. And the girl told him the whole story. Now this Tsar was a clever man, a sensible man. And he realized how clever this girl was. He realized that she had loved her father the most. But her father, the other Tsar, he was a stupid man, a greedy man for treasure, and he hadn't realized. Well, he was so happy that his son's bride would be so clever. And so he went home to tell his son to gather a party to go and collect her. And so the bride was brought home, and there was a wedding. Ah, such a wedding. They invited everybody from the kingdom, and of course, they didn't forget to invite the father's bride. When all the guests came, the tables were prepared, the food was cooked. Oh, it was wonderful, wonderful. The tables were laid with the most beautiful dishes, with the most beautiful bowls and cutlery, gold and silver and jewels beyond your imagination. The food was served, but he told the cooks to serve the food of the girl's father, the Avatar, without any salt. And so they began to eat. And the girl's father, the Avatar, he took a bite and he frowned, and he went to take another bite from another dish, and he took a bite and he frowned, and he took another bite, and well, it just wasn't right. And he was so hungry, he couldn't contain himself, and he said to the Tsar, "Neighbor, why are you keeping us hungry, neighbor?" And the Tsar, the girl's father-in-law, he was surprised. "Eat, neighbor, eat, eat. Look around you, there's dishes, there's food, the most beautiful food, and look, I've given you the most expensive bowls, the most expensive cutlery, gold and silver and jewels. Everything on this table is made to be eaten, neighbor, eat, eat." And the first Tsar, well, he was beyond disbelief. "Why are you acting like a crazy person?" he said. "Look at this gold and silver cutlery. Who can eat gold? Who can eat silver? Who can eat jewels? And look at this food. It's roasted hen with honey on top. Who eats birds with honey? Without salt, food isn't sweet. Give me salt, gay neighbor. Give me salt to put the world right. When the Tsar heard, he said, if salt will make everything right, and if you cannot live without salt, why did you chase your daughter away? Why did you chase your daughter away? And you kept your oldest two daughters, who said they loved you as much as they loved expensive things, things that you cannot do without. How do you know? Said the Tsar. I know. I know because of the bride. She told me. This bride is your youngest daughter, and she loved you the most, and you chased her out. And at this point, the Tsar realized that his youngest daughter had indeed loved him the most. For you cannot live in the world without salt. And now he knew that. There are plenty of people who live in poverty, who are fine, alive and well, without jewels, without gold and silver. There are people who haven't tasted a drop of honey in their lives, and yet they're fit and well, but you cannot live without salt. And so he realized his older two daughters hadn't really truly loved him, and he left his kingdom to his youngest daughter, for she could discern the important things in life.
Oh, beautiful. And you've just blown every theory I had in my head out of the window with that one. That's what I love when you're looking for, because every other version apart from, and I won't lie, but apart from East Anglia, is there's magic in them. But that was just I mean, the Czech one I love, because instead of marrying the prince in the end, it's the daughter kicked out. But in most I Love You More Than Salt stories, the salt disappears from the kingdom, and in some and some they go across the border and it's turned into when he's sent to buy salt in the next kingdom, and of course the gold, it's turned back to gold when it comes back into the kingdom, and so forth. And the daughter turns up with a little bag of salt. But in the Czech one, it's like that. But of course, by that time, she wants to marry. She doesn't want to marry a prince. It's she wants to marry the fisherman's son, and of course, Dad lets her, well, because in the reconciliation, because he and has the fisherman's son as an advisor. He won't come to, but they want to live in the forest. But but there's all these versions, but I've never come across another one except for the one from East Anglia that has that kind of twist. But right now we're going across to well, if I say near Bistrica, because it's the nearest big town, and Gwali is a part of Valley, and because these daughters haven't been rejected. These daughters are bad. Oh, and they're amongst my favourite characters out there. Their mother is Mamu Paduri, and she looks after the forest, and you don't want to mess about in the forest. One of the worst moments of my life was I was trying to collect Mama Paduri stories, and the old men at the bar shouted in Romanian to me, Mama Paduri is dead. And that had so much meaning because of the way they're stripping the forest right now. And then Veronica, who we'll hear talking in a minute, and put yourself video back on, Veronica, so we can see your face, and give us a wave. And her and her family were driving me around across the fields, and she said, "We are in the land of Mama Paduri. and everything came back, and I felt that. But we're not the Mamo Paduri right now. We're having a story about her daughters, I think, the Fata Paduri. And if you're a young man, you don't want to mess with them either. So I don't know whether Bianca or Yulia, who's in control. Bianca, you are in control. Yeah, it's a women's night. Bianca, can you give us, Veronica? It's there's subtitles because Veronica speaks very good English, but she's kind of shy.
I'm ready for you.
You ready?
Yes.
Okay.
Do you see it?
Yeah, it's up
Welcome
there.
to World Storytelling Cafe.
Bună ziua! Mă numesc Veronica, ea este prietena mea, Flori, și în spatele camerei se află Bogdana.
I'm the listener. Hello everyone, enjoy!
Despre Fata Pădurii. În primul rând, trebuie să știți că ne aflăm în pitoreasca vale a Bârgăului, o localitate din Bistrița Năsăud, Transilvania, România. Aici găsim localități vechi care adună peisaje minunate, oameni simpli cu suflet curat, dar și credințe păgâne extrem de vechi. O astfel de credință este în existența unei entități numită Fata Pădurii, un geniu rău al pădurilor, o divinitate malefică, nefastă din mitologia românească. Uneori apare ca o femeie tânără, alteori foarte bătrână, cu părul lung și care merge prin păduri, bocind neîncetat. Întotdeauna când se plimbă, stârnește vuietul codrului, iar adesea râde ea însăși în hohote sinistre sau plânge hohotitor, alteori chiuie sau croncăne. Umblă pe la marginea pădurilor, momind drumeții rătăciți. Și să știți că știu câteva relatări despre această entitate de la oamenii locurilor, de la copiii școlii de la noi de aici, din Josenii Bârgăului, de la străbunici, bunici, deci exact de la locuitorii acestei zone, Valea Bârgăului.
Ce zici, Vera, ne mai zici niște povești?
Da, și o să vi le spun exact cum mi le-au spus copiii, cu vorbele lor, deci cu mămuca lor, cu străbunica lor, cu oamenii cu numele lor real, și în spatele acestor povești chiar există oamenii aceia. Ci că pe vremea mămucii, oamenii credeau și chiar se întâlneau cu asemenea ființe. Să nu zici niciodată nimic către ea că muțăști, așa zicea străbunica bunicii. Erau crescute pe muntele Oala, în Pripor. Acolo au copilărit și au ascultat cu sfințenie sfaturile bătrânilor, fiindcă aveau de trecut tot timpul prin pădure. Se zice că tătucu a avut o pățanie cu acea vietate. Într-o noapte a ieșit cu oile din staul. Era oier vestit cu cele 200 de oi ale lui. Avea un băiat ca ajutor și au mers amândoi să caute oile după sunetul clopotelor. Deodată, în vârful muntelui, a auzit drept în fața lui ca o ruptură de buhaș și un huruit mare, parcă venea o căruță la vale. Nu s-a înspăimântat și s-a uitat cu atenție în jur. A rămas înlemnit când a văzut în fața sa o nălucă mare și hâdă care se uita la el. Avea păr pe corp și era albă la față. Bănuind cine e, a scuipat de 3 ori și a făcut Sfânta Cruce. A scos cureaua și a pocnit cu ea în buhaș. Dintr-o dată s-a auzit un chioit lung, iar năluca a dispărut în noapte. Nu departe de locul acela și-a găsit și oile.
Ce interesant.
Mai vreți să vă mai spun una?
Vrem,
Ei, se zice așa. Oamenii trebuiau să fie mereu cu rugăciunea pe limbă, că nu știau când le putea ieși în cale arătări care puteau poci. le puteai auzi cântând gros și urât sau strigându-i pe bărbați pe nume. Ce faci, bă, Ioane? Da tu, Andrei! Vasile! Ei, o altă istorioară vine de la moșul Gheorghe, un bătrân de 90 de ani, care spunea că într-o noapte, când se întorcea de la pădure alături de fratele său, deși cunoștea drumul foarte bine, nu reușea să-l găsească. Mereu în ecoul pădurii se auzea râsul unei femei care îi purtau un cerc. Doar când s-a luminat de ziua și a cântat cocoșul, cei doi au putut găsi drumul. Da, uneori noaptea putea fi foarte, foarte liniștită, iar dimineața țăranii vedeau cu uimire că boii aveau flori și buruieni împletite în coarne și cozi și erau foarte hrăniți și oile erau sătule, iar clopotele le erau umplute cu pământ ca să nu sune. Și străbunicul știe o pățanie a cumnatului său, Leon, care fiind tânăr a răspuns la strigătele fetei pădurii și a rămas fără voce 3 zile. Abia după multe descântece și rugăciuni făcute de mama lui și-a recăpătat Leon vocea. Deci, nu e de joacă cu fata pădurii. Uite, ciobanii bătrâni spuneau că dacă era lăsată în pace, aceasta nu făcea rău la nimeni. Îi erau foarte dragi animalele, în special oile, pe care le plimba după miezul nopții. Fata pădurii nu a fost văzută niciodată în timpul zilei. După ce s-a sfârșit cel de-al doilea război mondial, nu s-a mai auzit nimic de fata pădurii. Bătrânii spun că ar fi dispărut de frica împușcăturilor. Dar cine știe? Eu de multe ori când mă plimb prin pădurile din Bârgău, simt așa că parcă cineva mă urmărește de după copăcei și nu mi-e frică. Îmi place.
Cineva ne veghează.
Da.
Fata pădurii.
E așa.
Interesant.
Da.
Veniți de vă bucurați. Povești magice pentru cei dragi nouă.
Mulțumim!
Thank you, Veronica. Ah. Now, you're still, yes. Unmute Veronica's microphone. There's so are those the stories that because you brought out a little booklet of the stories the children had brought you. Were the stories you were telling from you asked your school children to bring in stories from their grandparents, and so those are the stories you were telling just then. Ah, yeah, brilliant. You're doing really good work there. Are you still collecting them? Are they still bringing the stories in?
Today, no, but I think if I ask, I found another story, interesting story.
Excellent.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much, Veronica. That was brilliant, and it looked. And I'm quite sick that I can't be there, of course. So when all this is over,
yes,
we'll all meet on the mountain. Until then, we have one more story. Now, Tom, you've done a bit of weaving, haven't you, here? And so I haven't the faintest idea what was going. Tom went back a moment and he met this guy Will around sitting around London around Elizabethan James times, and had a bit of a chat with him, and Tom was, you know, they were sitting around like you do, and Tom said, well, I happen to know a story like that from, you know, about 100 miles the other side of where I live, and he said, I think my version's better than yours. So Shakespeare turned round. This is absolutely true, everyone. Yeah, this is true, Tom, isn't it? That Shakespeare turned around and said, what we'll do, there's a bit of a plague, and there was plague at the time in London. So Shakespeare, they went up the East Coast by boat, and they went to Manningtree, and then they went to Ipswich. They did a bit in Ipswich. They came down Mike's Way after that. Went inland to Corby. And Tom met them somewhere on there. And what was the story you and William Shakespeare came up with, Tom?
Oh, a little known one called King Lear. So, yes. So, yeah, I'm going to tell. Basically, this is my retelling of the King Lear story. A couple of years ago, I wrote Leicestershire Folk Tales for Children for the History Press, and King Lear, the idea of King Lear giving his name to Leicester, I thought, oh, this would be good. I'll put this story into the book. And then I did a bit of research. I hadn't really seen the play. I didn't know the story that well. Did the research, and I thought, hold on a minute, this is very similar in a few ways to Kappa Rushes, which comes from East Anglia. And I thought, I know that story, and it would make a far more interesting story to engage younger readers if I smashed them together. So this is my take on King Lear. And my story starts like all good stories start, with the once upon a time. And it starts with a king who sat on a throne, at the edge of a great river in his castle. This river was the River Soar, and this king was King Lear. Now, King Lear wanted above all other things to have an heir, a male heir to the throne, but alas, he did not have a boy. He had 3 daughters, all 3 of them beautiful, but not a boy. But he still loved them with all his heart. The eldest, Goneril, she was naturally gifted at everything, and she was beautiful, and people wanted to be with her. The middle child, Regan, well, she was a typical middle child, always trying to keep up with the eldest of the 3, and she was deeply competitive. And the youngest, Cordelia, well, she had her head in the clouds. She was one to wander the fields, to pick the sweet-smelling herbs and flowers, and cook. She spent many of her days in the presence of the cook, cooking food. And she knew all the herbs and the spices and everything that went together just right. Now, the king was getting older, and the girls were at an age where they should be married off. And so he got them together, and he said to the girls, he said, look, I need to decide when I go, who's going to inherit the kingdom. Now, I need to know who loves me the most, and then I will give you the inheritance of the kingdom. And so he started with the eldest, with the eldest. And Goneril said, Father, but of course I love you. I love you so much. I love you to the moon and back. Regan, not wanting to be outdone, Regan said, well, Father, I love you to the sun and back, which I think might be a bit further, but I'm not sure. But I love you more anyway. The youngest daughter, she stood there with a posy of herbs in her hand. She'd come from the kitchen where she'd been baking and cooking. And she thought for a second. She smelt the herbs. And she thought about what she was cooking. And she said, very thoughtfully, said, Father, I love you like fresh meat loves salt. Now, of course, she knew the meaning of this, but her father never spent a day in his life in the kitchen and only ever ate the food. And he had no idea what she meant by this. And he flew into a fit of rage. How dare you, he said, how very dare you insult me? Your older sisters, they have told me they love me at great lengths. But you, like salt loves meat and meat loves salt. Guards! He called for the guards, and he called for her to be banished from his lands. And she was taken down to the coast, put on a merchant ship and sent over the channel to France. And so it was that he decided that he wasn't going to give the lands to just one of his daughters. He was going to divide the lands equally between his eldest two daughters. And they would get half of those lands now and half when he'd passed away, on the proviso that they were married. Well, life ticked over back in good old Blighty. But poor Cordelia found herself alone and lost in a strange foreign land where people spoke a strange language. She was still wearing the beautiful gown that she had been walking around the castle in, for she had not had time to change. And she realized that she was now a bit of a target in the finery that she wore. And so she decided to make a disguise. She found a river and a patch of rushes, and she sat and she picked the rushes and she began to weave and weave and weave until she wove a great cloak and a great hood, a cap over her head, a cap of rushes. And she wandered the land until she came to a castle. She went round the back of the castle and she went to the kitchen. And knowing that she could cook, she asked if she could have work there in the kitchens cooking. But the cook said, no, you can't. No. Look at the staging. You can clean, yes, but you can't cook. And I'll give you food and you can sleep by the fire. How's that? And so it was that Cordelia, or as she became known, Kappa Rushes, started working at the castle. And being amongst those foreign languages, she picked them up very quickly. She picked up the French, the Gallic, and she began to converse with the people. And one day, the scullery maid, she bundled in. She said, "Oh, it's so exciting! The prince is going to hold a ball," she said. And this is where it turns into very much a Cinderella story. The prince is throwing a ball and he's trying to find someone to marry. And that week, the conversation was all about the ball that was going to be thrown and what kind of dresses they would see. And so on the night of the ball, the scullery maid and the cook, they finished their work as quickly as they could. And they went to see what they could see, to watch the women in their finery. Cordelia, she said she was having an early night and settling down by the fire. But when they'd gone, Cordelia shed the cap of rushes. She brushed down her finery and she went to the ball. And when she walked in, heads turned, for she was beautiful. And she was dressed in a way that no one had seen before, for it was clothes from a foreign land. And the prince, well, his mouth dropped open. And he grabbed her. And he danced with her. And they swirled and they twirled and they danced around the room until midnight had come and gone. And the band had stopped playing. And Cordelia left. It was only at that moment the prince realized he hadn't asked her a single thing. Hadn't even asked her name. But he knew he needed to see her again. The next morning, Kappa Rushes was surprisingly tired for someone who had had an early night. And the people started talking in the kitchen, the scullery maid and the cook. They started talking about this girl that no one knew, no one recognized, and how amazing she was dressed and how the prince clearly was in love. And then the very next day, it was announced another ball the next week was being arranged. And the same thing happened. Cordelia turned up in her finery and she danced and she twirled and she spun with the prince until the early hours of the morning, and then she disappeared. And the prince once more forgot to ask her a name. And a third time it happened. And they danced and they whirled and they twirled. But this time the prince asked her name. And she said she could not give it to him. It was a secret. He had to work for her love. "Well, I can come and find you," he said. "Just tell me your name and I'll come and find you." "No," she said, worried that his love was just an infatuation. So he gave her a ring. "I will know when I've found you, for you will have this ring," he said. And off she went. Well, days ticked over into weeks, and the prince searched high and low throughout the kingdom for his mystery girl. But then he became ill, and he lay in his bed, and no amount of cajoling, none of the quacks or apothecaries could seem to make him feel any better, and it was decided that he was dying of a broken heart, for he was missing his one true love. And the word filtered down through the castle, down to the cooks and the scullery maids and cap of rushes. So it must be true, she thought. His love for me is real. She had an idea. She begged and she pleaded the cook to let her cook the broth for his tea that night. And after some cajoling, the cook let her cook the broth. And she spooned it and ladled it into the bowl, and she dropped the ring into the bottom. And the bowl was taken by the cook up to the prince's room. The prince, he struggled, but he was hungry. He managed to eat all the broth until the last spoonful went. What was that? The ring. He looked at the cook, and she was a lady of advancing years and advancing waistline. And he said, "You did not cook this broth, did you?" And the cook said, "Yes, it was me, yes." He said, "No, it wasn't. You're a liar. Tell me the truth and I will not be mad." And she said, "No, don't be mad. It were Kappa Rushes. She cooked it. Bring me Kappa Rushes now," he said. And Kappa Rushes was whisked from the kitchen up to the prince. And she took off her Kappa Rushes, and there she was. And the prince knew that this was the woman he danced with, and she knew his love for her was real. And so they were married. Years went by, and she lived a happy life, but not so her father. You see, her father, sorry, that's my wife poking her head. You see, her father, his daughters had married. Goneril and Regan had married, but the people they'd married, the suitors, they were growing impatient, for they wanted control of half the land now. They didn't want to wait until their father-in-law had died. And so they had mounted a rebellion, and they kicked out King Lear, and King Lear found himself on the other side of the Channel in France. And he was invited to the palace, where the prince was now the king, and Cordelia was now the queen. And he walked into the palace, and he did not recognize his daughter, for it had been many years, and she was now dressed in much finery, but she recognized him. And that night they sat down to dinner. But Cordelia went to her old friend, the cook, and she said to her, "Look, don't put any salt on the meat." "But you can't do that," said the cook. "Meat loves salt. It gives it the taste. It takes it from a bland bit of cardboard to something out of this world." "Just don't," said Cordelia, "please." And so she didn't. And that night they sat and they dined with King Lear. And King Lear, when he dug into the finest steak that he'd ever seen, but it was very bland. And then he tried some other meats. And every meat that he tried, it looked amazing, but it tasted very, very bland. "This," he said, "this is missing. It's missing something. What is it missing?" And then Cordelia looked at him and she smiled and she said, "Is it missing salt?" And with that phrase, the king burst into tears. My daughter, she loved me most of all. I did not see it, for I was not wise enough to realize how much meat loves salt. But she was wiser than me, and she would make a better queen than I have ever made a king. "It's me, father. Do you not see?" said Cordelia. And drying his eyes, he looked, and there she was. Yes, she was older. Yes, she was dressed in more finery, but that was his baby girl. And she grabbed him and she hugged him and he hugged her, and all was forgiven. But now the king, having made up with Cordelia, he had the backing of the French king. And with the French king and the might of his army, they travelled over the Channel and they took on Regan and Goneril and their husbands. And they fought and they won back the seat of power there on the River Soar. And that's where King Lear lived out his remaining days before Cordelia took over the reign of the country. And in honour of King Lear, the place where his castle once stood is now called Lear's City, or as we call it, Leicester City, home of the greatest Premier League side ever. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
That last bit was especially for Mike. That.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't have guessed. Brilliant, brilliant. I think there's some of those love you more than salt stories. Mad, you know. There's no, he's not let off the hook. You know, he never gets any salt and he loses his mind altogether, which is even more King Lear. But lovely. It's been we've had great stories on that theme. And yeah, I mean, Disney kind of, on one hand, Disney put fairy tales around the world, but the disservice he did with all those stories was making it all look as if it was about marrying a prince. And, you know, as far as I can see, you know, and looking at it looking at all the stories we've had, the consistent bit is it's sort of, however bad life gets, hold on to that inner strength and you might get through, because these were stories told by mothers to daughters when they were being sent out into the world to work, probably at the age of 12 and something, and all mothers could give them were stories, and they were stories of life. They were told, you know, it's going to get bad for you out there, and you know, right now, you know, we could do with that, instead of we do with that pithiness in the stories, and we've had a great selection from around the world. Nana, yours was fantastic. And Tom, I love that marriage. I love the idea of Caparushes off to France, King's daughter off to France. Yeah, and I quite like the idea of academics turning in their graves as well. David, brilliant one from the lakes. Do we want a little chat about the scene before we go? You know, I mean, because Bianca and Yulia don't have families, so they can sit here all night. So
yeah, I just want to say it's great to hear the different stories, because the one you were saying, Mossy Cat or
Mossy Coat.
Yes, I know, is Sap Sarrow. Again, very similar. That kind of thing. I'm guessing in Mossy Coat, get the animals to weave some kind of coat.
No. Mossy Coat. One of the reasons I like Mossy Coat is that I'm not going to tell it because that go on a year. But it's her and her. There's a tinker in it, but in fact it's a heavily disguised version of a father wanting too much love. But it's her and her mother conspiring to rip the guy off for everything he's got, and then he goes, and then it's all used, and then it's back to almost a Cinderella theme of when she goes, and the mother knows the future. So it's got a bit of fairy godmother in there, you know. Sends her, goes to a house, knock on the door, asks for a job. And of course, she's all got her grotty clothes on, but she's got her lovely clothes that she nicked off the peddler, off the tinker earlier. And it's all that sort of thing. Now, I like it because it's definitely a story. It fits very much into contemporary life, because it's her and her mother in control the whole story. Even at the very end, when the rich guys you know, after, you know, I went to put her arms, hold on, she said, and she went upstairs and came down that dress of silver. And he went to put her arms, hold on, she said, and she went upstairs and came down that dress of silk, the colour of the bird of the sky. Hold on, no, and then he'd learnt his lesson and he asked her story. So it's it's, you know, it's my time, mate, my time, you know, like, hands off, you know. Just because you got 8 arms, just like an octopus, doesn't mean I'm going to do exactly what you say. And then, so, and I think, I mean, I use that version because it fits. I don't like, I'm not keen on changing stories around to make, you know, so they fit into contemporary sort of ways, because I think in the great pantheon of world stories, there's enough stories around. You know, there's thousands of, well, Deep says, you know, when we've had it tonight, there's thousands of stories around about strong women. We don't need that sort of, well, we need all the stories. There's no stories that we don't need. But you know, that the Walt Disney version of is probably not. We need stories of strength right now. You know, and I think young people especially need stories of strength because it's difficult for them. And when I as a final thing, years ago I was working with young offenders, and I said, and I was talking about this, and I said, you know, Cinderella, and there was this kid in there who said, I've never been told a fairy tale in my life, and I'm thinking, no wonder I've got you in here, mate. You know, and so, you know, and we get that power. I talk forever. So does anyone else want to put into this?
Can I ask a question, please? Yeah. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Tom very much, particularly for his fine adaptation.
Yeah, I'm worried about you too.
Rika, I appreciate we don't have time for you to tell us, but I'd be very interested to hear how the Cinderella story is treated in the Finnish tradition.
Yes, we have stories of very typical one is the man is remarrying another wife, and the other wife is always bad and evil, and then they both have daughters, and of course the mother is preferring the biological daughter, and then they end up chasing normally the firstborn away, and then but it's not about marrying a prince. We don't have so much princes. It's about the girl to find wealth and fortune by herself. So Finland is a country for strong women, and we've never had princes, so we have been managing on our own. But in very many of these stories, the poor girl who has been chased away to find her own fortune, it's the kindness that is the element that is like making the change in the story. So when she's kind to poor people or animals or whatever creatures she meets on the road, then she is getting magical help, and she survives. And then the girl who is not poor and not abandoned, she's selfish and she doesn't help small creatures, so the end is not so good for her. So that's the typical structure of kind of a
so that's a common theme throughout, and that fits into, I mean, there's Scott's stories, the three heads in the well, which when it comes down to East Anglia becomes the Princess of Colchester, and that theme of kindness runs throughout the world, and you know, like the kind person, the magical creature is sort of usually disguised as someone, and it was in it was in, and that links up to Nana's story where she meets the old guy in the road and stuff, and so that, kindness wins.
Yes.
And it's not the meek shall inherit the earth. These are very strong people who, whatever, I've only got a little bit, but I'll share it with you. And that's a kind of, they're very unselfish stories. Well, I'm going to thank you all, and thank you everyone who's contributed, whether it's been by film or actually in person. I think it's been a brilliant night. I love these theme nights. Tomorrow night is particularly important. I want to get a plug in because you'd mentioned the History Press, Tom, where your book is published, but Dave's got his new book coming out on the History Press tomorrow night. Is Sarah you still with us? You don't happen to know the title of Dave's book, do you? That's coming out tomorrow.
I can tell you in 2
Medieval
seconds.
folk tales.
Medieval folk sounds right to me.
Well, normally Dave would be in a bookshop, probably an independent bookshop.
That's back.
Launching his book tomorrow, and there would be crowds of people, hundreds of people lined up outside the shop to have him sign a copy. However, we'll have to do virtual signatures, but being unable to launch his book in a shop, he is launching it tomorrow night at 6 o'clock at the same time, live and direct at the World Storytelling Cafe. So that's going to be an exciting one. And then Saturdays, we've got Saturday, of course, we've got this continuation of this brilliant a series of Giles Abbott telling Viking stories while his friend James does illustrations as he goes, which is and has been incredibly successful. So we're on twice a day anyway, but whether it's midday, a good time to join us if you're in Texas is midday. There's if you're in Romania, it's 8 o'clock. I don't know what's 6 o'clock in Finland, Rika.
8.
I was saying you're the same as Romania, and if you're in India, don't bother, or unless you're a night owl. But it's been brilliant, and thank you ever so much for coming, everybody, and everyone I can't see. I'll wave you goodbye. Goodbye, everyone. Big clap for everyone who told today.